Hey everyone, welcome to this radio video, and this is a little technical video, I would say. We're going to talk about the why of AM upper and lower sidebands. I had a video talking about upper and lower, where and why, but we're going to talk about the reasons behind the fact that some signals are in AM mode and some signals are in upper or lower sideband mode, and the difference. Why did shortwave listening and even amateur radio operators, why do they have these modes? But we're mainly going to talk about AM, upper and lower sideband. Okay, for most people in North America, when I talk about AM, they think about a band which is the medium wave band or the AM band in North America. In North America, we never called it medium wave. We called it AM. Why? Because that was the mode of transmission of the medium wave band from 520 to 1710 kilohertz. So for most people, AM means, oh, the AM band. Well, no. AM is a mode of transmission. It's a way of sending signals. And I'm going to show you an example of AM mode with WWV, for example. That is AM mode. Another station, let's take that religious station here on 15610.
Pull down her signal from the satellite so that the shortwave radio signal that was going out through the radio station that she founded.
This is 15610.
Could be brought into the
this is another station in AM mode. AM mode is actually an upper and lower sideband signal together, sent with what we call a carrier. So you notice that when they stop talking, your S meter still shows there's a signal, because that's what we call the carrier. It is sent together with, at the same time, an upper and a lower sideband signal. And that's why you can actually take an AM signal, put your radio in upper sideband, still listen to the radio station, put your radio in lower sideband, and still listen to the radio station. Why? Because when you put your radio in sideband, you actually remove the carrier from the station itself and change it with the carrier that's in the radio. And since they are dual sidebands, meaning that the signal in AM mode is sent in upper and lower sideband at the same time with the carrier, you can either choose to take upper or lower sideband. And this has a big advantage in a very crowded area of the band. Because if you go and listen to a signal that is very close to another one, you can use this capability to lower the interference level. So in a crowded shortwave band, if, for example, there would be a very strong signal interfering on 15615, since 15615 is upper in frequency, then I would choose lower sideband, because I'm listening downwards from the frequency, which means that the station interfering higher in frequency will not be interfering anymore. So you can use this trick to DX weak stations in between very strong ones. The reverse is true. If the station interfering would be on 15605, it's lower in frequency, so I would go on the main frequency I want to listen to and put my radio in upper sideband, which means I'm listening up from 15610. So these are little tricks that you can use to lower interference. Now, why stations broadcast in AM is very simple. AM mode requires the simplest of all receivers to get a signal. When your station's in AM, basically all you need in the most basic form would be a detector, a diode for example, a coil to tune the frequency, and a capacitor and a pair of earphones. And that's what was crystal radio. Crystal radio was basically just a detector and a tuning circuit and an earphone to listen to the signal. So you need cheaper radios to listen to AM mode because it requires very, very minimal circuit. But there's also a big advantage of AM mode, the quality of the audio. You've noticed that listening to a station in AM sounds better than listening to a station in sideband, especially for music. On voice, there's not that much of a difference, but on music, you notice that music sounds better in AM mode than sideband. And that's also one of the reasons. AM mode is larger, takes more space in the shortwave spectrum, so it has more audio frequencies that it can transmit. It's not complicated. Signals are sent with audio. We are listening to something. And the thing is, the more rich frequencies, the more frequencies we can send through that signal, the better it sounds to our ears. And that's why FM radio really, really became popular. Because FM radio is much larger than AM, first of all. And also because of another technical way where the signal is actually fluctuation in frequency instead of AM mode, which is amplitude modulation. So FM can transmit more audio information at the same time, and that makes FM much better, of course. But if we're back at AM, the largeness of the signal is also one of the main factors why we interfere with each other when you listen to close together stations. And that's where a very good receiver with good filters for selectivity is important, because AM stations are so large on the band that when they're close together we kind of receive some interference from the stations that are close. But of course you can use that upper or lower sideband trick that I showed you to kind of lower that. And I use it a lot actually. When stations are too close together, I use that trick a lot in order to listen to stations that are weaker in between very strong stations. Another problem with the AM mode is because the sidebands are on both sides. When signals propagate, you've noticed that on shortwave signals aren't stable. They aren't always S9. They are moving around up and down in strength. That's because of changes in the ionosphere. The ionosphere is that place, in about 150 miles above our head, that actually reflects the signal, and that is a little spot of atmosphere that's ionized by the solar activity, solar particles. And that's not something that's fixed. It's something that changes all the time due to the physics of our atmosphere. So that's why signals go down and up and down and up. And you notice that when they go down and up, they also sometimes sound distorted. And that's because the upper and lower sideband will sometimes shift slightly in frequency, but enough that it's just gonna make a big garble. You just don't understand what's gonna be said for a few seconds because the sidebands just kind of interfere with each other. So that's the negative of AM mode, is the fact that it does tend to get difficult when propagation is not great and when signals are weak to listen to a signal. And that's the negative side of AM mode. But stations actually use AM because radios are cheaper with AM than they are with sideband. And a last negative side of AM mode, it requires tremendous amounts of power to broadcast to you. If you look at the list of stations on shortwave, you'll notice that stations on shortwave tend to broadcast with 100, 200, 300 kilowatts. That's very, very, very strong. 100,000 watts. That's a lot of power. And stations, some of them go up to 500,000 watts. It's just incredible. So it costs a lot of money to broadcast AM. And one of the things that was talked about in the 80s is that stations would try to maybe transmit in sideband mode to have lower costs. But of course that never really picked up. There were a few stations that experimented. HCJB was one of the pioneers there. They would broadcast on 21.455 kilohertz. They had that a 1 kilowatt transmitter there, sideband only, that you could listen to their station, and that was kind of a little experiment they did there. Today there's one station that's in sideband, which is W. I never remember the name of the colors of the station, WJC or something. 15550. Well, this is an AM station on top, but on 15550, when this station's not there, we hear that station in Florida that actually is in sideband only. I'd like to know how many listeners they have in sideband, since most cheap radios don't even have sideband. It's also a little difficult to tune sideband when you're not used to it, and especially with cheaper radios. Upper and lower sideband is a different thing. It's basically, remember that I told you the AM signal had double sidebands? Now just think about it. You remove the carrier, so you remove that signal that your S meter is always showing when there's nothing there, which takes a lot of power, and you remove one of the sidebands and you get to either a lower or upper sideband. Now what does it mean, lower or upper? Lower means that it broadcasts from the frequency you're tuning downwards, and upper means it's tuning from the frequency you're listening to upwards. So if I'm listening, let's try to get a lower sideband signal here. I don't know if propagation is gonna let me get one of those. Of course, I'm in the demonstration, so nothing's there. Well, anyway, no signal here. So when you listen to lower sideband signals, basically what you get is a signal that you're listening to that's downward in frequency. And the reason you can understand it is because that carrier that AM has, well, now it's your radio that actually puts a carrier. That's why you can listen to a sideband signal, is that your radio creates its own carrier. And from that carrier, it takes that sideband signal, adds it to the carrier, and it becomes an audible signal. So if we take an upper sideband signal, let's try to get something. Of course, we'll try to find something. There must be something on. Oh, the man's really quiet on this thing. Here we go. So this one is an upper sideband signal. That means that it's transmitting 14287 upwards in frequency.
Calling CQ, Kilo Bravo 3. November Zulu uniform, calling CQ, calling CQ.
The great positive side of sideband usage, lower power, because your own radio creates that little carrier, it does not have to send a carrier, so it really is lower in power. And you notice that when he's talking, every time he stops talking, a USB signal or LSB signal is also not transmitting. It transmits only when there's a sound. And sideband signals are also very good at noise level. So if you can't listen to a station in AM mode because it's too weak, well, there's a chance that a similar strength single sideband signal, you'll be able to listen to it. It is better, and it is better because the area of listening, so I was talking a little earlier about AM signals being quite wide. Well, single sideband signals are not as wide. They're actually half as wide because they only use one side of the main frequency. So they're kind of half the size. And that helps when there's a lot of noise, because you'll have less noise, first of all. Second of all, the fact that there's a stable signal in your radio that actually doesn't propagate, because it's always the same strength, also helps a sideband signal to stay clearer. Even if it fades in and out, you'll probably notice that, except for the fact that it might become inaudible because it's too weak. One thing for sure is that a signal never, in upper or lower sidebands, a signal almost never distorts. It just gets weaker or stronger, where an AM signal will distort at some point when it propagates. The disadvantage of sideband signals is the fact that it requires a receiver that can receive sideband. It also requires an understanding of how to tune it, because especially on portable receivers, it's very easy on a receiver like this one, because this is always on frequency. So you know that you're in upper or lower, and you just tune the correct frequency, and you know the guy's on 14287. On portable receivers, there's no such reference, because you're not really sure, and there's always this little BFO or tuning button that you need to play with. So you have to kind of guess where he is, because you can receive him on 14286 or 15288, and then you gotta play with that tuning button. So a portable receiver is sometimes annoying in trying to tune such a signal. So that's a negative side of it. Also, another negative side is the audio quality. Even though with good equipment, sideband signals can be surprisingly good in audio quality, they are not like an AM signal, because since it has half of the bandwidth, well, it also has half of the audio frequency. There's less information that can be sent on that signal. So it chops off very often the higher end of the frequencies. So music, for example, will sound different, and unless you have a very precise tuning, music will even sound really strange or really weird. So it's something that's not really good for that type of transmissions. But for voice, it's fantastic. For voice, it does a great job, and sideband is good for that. So it was technical. I hope I didn't lose too many people who are listening to it. At least you can, go back and restart the video and just say what, or go back at some point where I talked about something you're not sure. But pretty much The bands were decided this way because AM mode is mostly broadcast stations, easier, cheaper receivers, but takes tremendous amount of power. And amateur operators, even though there are some AMers, because of the great sound it gives, most of them are in sideband because of lower power requirements. So you can, only use 100 watts, 200 watts, and it's not, 100% cycle duty, what we call, which means that when you're not talking and in between your words, for example, your radio doesn't transmit. Where in AM, the radio would transmit continuously a signal. So that's pretty much the differences with AM, upper and lower sideband. Gave you that little trick. If you have interference, why not try to tune an AM signal? Of course, your radio needs to be very precise and tune the exact tone and frequency. And so that's something that's easier for someone like me with a big radio like my Icon here than it would be for a portable receiver, for example. So tune around, get those sideband and AM signals. Hope my explanation was good, and hope it helped some of you out there understand a little more the why of sideband and AM modes. And of course there's a lot of other modes available, but here we're staying in that little field. So hope you enjoyed the little explanation. 73s.